It's kind of expensive, but they make a lot of shit. $400,000 of this one. And then they donate that. It's all the charities. It's a non-profit.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah, I'm sure some of it.
Welcome aboard Helena's famous Last Chance Tour Train. I'm your engineer, Buffalo Brian. Together we'll be roaming around Montana's capital city together for the next hour. So sit back, relax. We've got a lot of interesting things to take a look at. Please stay seated at all times during the tour, and as we travel around, I'll be pointing out things to the right and left of the train, trying to give you enough lead time so you can see what's coming up. For starters, we'll make a loop around the Capitol complex where I'll point out a few buildings along the way. Then we'll travel across the gulch and look at the mansions on the west side of town where I tell you about some of the folks who originally lived in them. And then we'll go up the gulch and learn about the early day mining history here in Helena. After that, we'll travel right by the edge of Helena National Forest and make our way back here in about an hour. If we're going to do all that, we better get it rolling. Let's see if we have enough steam to make it down the road. Yes, we do. And away we go. The great granite building coming up to the right is the Veterans and Pioneer Memorial Building. It houses a lot of the artwork of Charlie Russell, who really did such a great job of depicting early day life in Montana. Upstairs is Military Museum. It's also a home for the Montana Historical Society. A great place to visit, to be open all day. How's the volume? Is everybody here okay?
Yep.
Okay. Coming up to the train's right is the symbol of the pros, the Bob Scriber bronze, originally made for the Pro Cowboy Rodeo Association of Oklahoma City.
What's his name again?
Then back to the left is the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Inside is a display that has all the game fish in Montana. There's also a 600-pound grizzly bear and a wild male turkey with a beard. Well, actually, he's not quite 600 pounds. He's 564-pound grizzly bear, but I think they caught him on an empty stomach. That's why I think he's probably about 600 pounds. The yellow brick building to the right is the Justice Building. It houses the Montana Supreme Court as well as the Montana State Library, also known as the Joe Missouri Building. He was our Attorney General for a number of years. Back to the left is the Department of Environmental Quality, also known as the Lee Metcalf Building. Now, Lee represented Montana in Congress back in the 1960s, and he proposed legislation that the Congress that became the 1964 Wilderness Act, which created lots of wilderness areas across the USA, from Florida to Alaska. Beautiful linden trees to our left. Next, we'll take a ride up the hill, go by the governor's mansion. The forecast high today is 81. Probably get close to that. Always cools off into the 50s around Helena, being close to town. In the evenings, anyway. Had about 11.5 inches of rain or precipitation anyway so far this year. About 3 inches ahead of normal, so things are really pretty green around Montana. Lots of sunshine, sun up at 6 in the morning, sunset at 9 in the evening. Gives us about 15 hours of daylight. And coming up to the right is the governor's mansion, built in 1959. It's the home of our Governor Steve Bullock. And if you look closely etched in the glass on either side of the front door, you'll see a grizzly bear and a meadowlark, a state animal and bird from Montana. Ponderosa pine is our state tree, while the bitterroot is a state flower. That's a little mountain flower, kind of a violet colored flower. We got our songbirds back from the south. They migrated north in May. There's only a couple kinds of birds that I know of that like to stick around here all winter. One would be the magpie, and of course its cousin the crow. Got to tell you a little story about a couple of magpies that live just a few blocks away from here. In my backyard is my dog Jed. He's a pretty smart dog. He's a blue tick hound, but there's a couple of magpies that like to outfox him. Has all feed Jed, and then here comes the birds, and one of them will pop right in the grass in front of his nose, and squawk around and jump around and keep my dog entertained, while the other one's around behind him eating his dog food. They switch their act and off they go. As we travel around the Capitol complex, you might see a lot of different extra marks in the streets, arrows and whatnot. Well, they're remnants from the Governor's Cup race. It happened about a month ago. Features a 5K, 10K, half marathon, and marathon race. It's always quite popular. As we round the corner, if you keep looking down this road in front of us, and look clear across the valley to the north, and look along the skyline, you'll see the sleeping giant. The tall sloping peak is his chest. The sharp peak to the right of that is his nose. He's lying flat on his back looking up in the sky. Just beyond the sleeping giant, that's where the Missouri River runs. That's the Gates Mountains area, named by the Lewis and Clark expedition. As they came up the Missouri, it appeared a wall of limestone cliffs was going to block their way, but as they got closer, they found a passage through them. In their journals, they call the area the Gates of the Rocky Mountains. You too can travel through the Gates or JD Riverboat tours through the Rocky Canyon with Riverboat Jim. You'll see quite a variety of aircraft flying around Helena these days. A lot of it is firefighting aircraft. You see Helena Regional Airport out in the valley is a base for a tanker base for refueling those planes with fire retardant, the red fire retardant. Quite a variety of helicopters and also a DC-10, which is a very large airplane for our airport. To the right is the Mitchell Building, named in honor of Sam W. Mitchell, who was the Secretary of State for 23 years. And the bell on the corner to the right is a replica of the Liberty Bell, cast in France. Right after World War II, they made one for every state in the Union to help us celebrate our liberty. Ironically cast at the same foundry that the Statue of Liberty was created for America years earlier. Now, the structural architect of the Statue of Liberty was a Frenchman named Eiffel. Of course, he's best known for building the tower in Paris. It's named after him. It's the Eiffel Tower. Next to towards the Gulch area, the downtown area. Coming up to the right is the Department of Agriculture and Livestock. Economically, agriculture #1 in Montana. Of course, that includes a lot of products, including beef, barley, wheat, timber, wool, sugar, and huckleberries. Coming in second economically is tourism, followed by mining. A lot of coal mining over in eastern Montana. And to our left is the Capitol building. It's of a neoclassic design. It's made of native sandstone from Columbus, Montana, down along the Yellowstone River country. The dome is made of Montana copper from Butte, and the statue on top of the dome represents Lady Montana. Cornerstone of the building was laid July 4th, 1889, and it was completed 10 years later. Beautiful flower bed in front. They planted that about a month ago. Each year it spells out Montana and then has a date as well. Take a look at the statue of the horseman in front of the building. That represents General Thomas Francis Meagher, who was one of our first territorial governors. Quite an interesting man, born and raised over in Ireland. As a young man, he fought in the Irish Army against the British. Ended up getting himself captured. he sent him to a penitentiary over in Tasmania. After a couple of years, he broke out of jail as a free man. He came to the United States, where he jumped into the middle of the Civil War during the 1860s. He formed the Irish Brigade out of New York City, literally recruiting Irish immigrants. He came down the gangplank in New York Harbor. They fought valiantly. He was later considered to be a war hero. Then President Andrew Johnson appointed him to be the territorial governor of Montana. So out he came. Things went along well for a while up until they took off a fall riverboat right on the Missouri, where he got into an altercation. He was drowned, never to be seen again. Oh, we all know that Betsy Ross designed the Stars and Stripes for the United States of America. I think the most amazing thing about Thomas Marr was that when he was a young Irishman, he designed a tricolored flag. The colors were green, white, and orange. And from 1848 on, that has been the national flag of Ireland. The city of Helena is over 140 years old and again on that dusty gold camp infested with grizzly bears and rattlesnakes. It wasn't destined to be a ghost town like a lot of gold towns. Over 40,000 people live in the Helena area. Elevation there is 4,300 feet above sea level. The average daily high temperature is right around 47 degrees. Traveling to the west towards Missoula, about 13 miles away is McDonald Pass. That is the Continental Divide, 6,300 feet. Back in 1913, there was a young American aviator named Cromwell Dixon. He flew his little biplane into Helena and put on a flying expedition over to the fairgrounds that a lot of folks had never seen an airplane before. But he had a bigger goal in mind, as he had heard of a prize to be awarded to the first pilot who could fly over the Continental Divide in North America. Many had tried, none had made it. So he fueled up his little Curtis Pusher biplane, spiraled up to 7,000 feet, traveled west over McDonald Pass, landing at Elliston on the other side, where they telegraphed the news back east, and there was a check for $10,000 sent out to Cromwell, authored by J.J. Hill, president of the Great Northern Railroad. This street here is Raleigh. 3 blocks down to the right, a little red brick house, where Helena's famous movie star Gary Cooper was born and raised. He was educated here in Helena. His family also had a ranch north of town up by Craig, where he learned to rope and ride. Served him well as he starred in many Western movies. High Noon is my favorite, made in 1954. Actress Myrna Loy is also native of the Helena area. Her real name is Myrna Williams. And there's a performing arts theater named after her. Actually, she's from the mining town of Raidersburg, which is about 50 miles south of Helena. That's right at the southern tip of the Elkhorn Mountains. Country western music singer Charlie Pride spent many years here as a young man. He worked at the lead smelter in East Helena and played baseball for the smelterites. Now, even though he was a talented musician, what Charlie really wanted to do is be a pro baseball player. So he'd save his money and every spring he'd travel to the southern states, try out for the teams, but he never was quite good enough to make a team. However, his luck changed when he traveled through National Tennessee. There he traded in his baseball, went for guitar, sang a few songs, and immediately recognized his talent. Now, the beginning of a wonderful country western music career for Charlie. This tree coming up to our left with a white bark in the front yard is a cut-leaf birch, a popular yard tree. Most of the boulevard trees are green ash, and they're a nice shade tree, and the roots primarily go straight down so they don't lift up the sidewalk. Off in the distance to the left, Mount Helena, it's actually a city park. Great place to take a hike and get a view of the town. We've had a famous author that lived for decades right at the base of the mountain. He used to hike up there quite a bit himself. He wrote a lot about the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, the Lewis and Clark Expedition, and World War II, particularly about Eisenhower, citizen soldiers, He also wrote the book, The Band of Brothers. His name is Stephen E. Ambrose. His son Hugh lived in town as well. He wrote the script for the Pacific, which is all about the Marines doing their island hopping campaign during World War II. We've traveled by the Governor's Mansion. To our left is the original, built in 1888 by William Chessman. It has 20 rooms, 7 fireplaces, and served as home for 8 of Montana's governors from 1913 to 1959. Tours are available between 12 noon and 4 p.m. Tuesday through Saturday. All that beautiful red brick came west on the railroad from Zanesville, Ohio. The brown brick home coming up on our left is the home of Wilbur Fizz Sanders, an attorney that represents vigilantes over Virginia City. Vigilantes were a group of citizens that literally had to take the law into their own hands. Their elected sheriff, Henry Plummer, was a busy guy who certainly acted as their sheriff during the day, spent at night to make extra money and put a bandana on his face, and he'd rob people as they were leaving town. Eventually the townsfolk figured out what was going on. They had a hanging party, and they invited Henry Plummer and his gang. Here we are coming upon the beautiful St. Helena's Cathedral, modeled after the Buddhist Cathedral in Vienna, Austria, as well as the Dom, that lies along the Rhine River in Cologne, Germany. Construction began in 1908 and was dedicated in 1913. Construction was made possible mostly by a huge donation by Thomas E. Cruz, who was a poor Irish prospector who struck it rich. The cathedral is open for visitation throughout the day. Stained glass windows were created in Bavaria in southern Germany and were scheduled to be shipped across the Atlantic in 1912, but World War I, the Great War, loomed, and the waters of the North Atlantic were quite treacherous even for merchant ships, so the Germans held on to their work until peace was at hand, and in 1919 the plates were shipped over and installed, and they tell the great story. I'd like to tell you a tale about the space between the crosses on top of steeples, as it has to do with the first Special Service Force, who were Canadian and American pilots and paratroopers, who trained out at Fort Harrison, and then fought in World War II. Well, during their training, the pilots had a little slack time, and one of the guys started bragging. He said, "I bet I can take my airplane flat right between those 2 crosses there at the cathedral." The other guy said, "No way." They ended up putting up a $100 bet, saying that he couldn't do it. That's all it took for the pilot to crawl in this P-51 Mustang. Flew into town, apparently had to roll it a bit to make it fit. He was happy with himself, especially when they got back to the base where his buddies gave him the $100 bet. The pilot went on to have a wonderful career in the Air Force. Ultimately, he was the captain of Air Force One during the 1960s, shuttling around our president, Lyndon Johnson. The first Special Service Force were deployed during World War II over to Italy, where they captured Mount Defensa from the Germans at the cost of half of their unit. Then they turned and marched into Rome and were among the first of the Allies to liberate Rome, better known as the Devil's Brigade. Here we are at the Gulch areas where gold was originally discovered back in the 1860s. Yet extensively mined, not only on the surface. There's also a hard rock mining tunnel running underneath the streets. To the right is the stone building, is the Holter Museum of Art. But originally it was back in the 1920s, where the Ford Motor Company displayed and sold their Model Ts. The mural on the side of the building to the left depicts a high school team on a fire truck. It's a Helena tradition. Whenever a high school team's a state champ, they celebrate by taking a ride around town on a fire truck. We'll be crossing right over Last Chance Gulch and route to the mansions on the west side of town. To our left, a block away, the tall building with gold trim on top. That's the Montana Club. Back in the early days, that was a place where only the elite met. You see, you had to be a millionaire to be a club member, yet they had a lot of club members because Helena at that time had the most millionaires per capita of any city in the U.S. The brick building to the right originally was a carriage house. People wanted to go someplace to send their runner down to get their rig together, and off they went. Well, let's swing over by the Montana Club. There's a couple more things I want to show you.
There's terracotta building. Terracotta building.
Pillared building coming up on the right is the Montana Club. There's a plaque on one of the pillars that tells the story that this is where gold was originally discovered back in 1864. To the left, you get a nice view of the side of the power block. We'll be going by there a little later. Well, our train engine has a name, and its name is Canardly, and Canardly kind of likes it when we talk about it. The Rose Granite building coming up to the right with all the beautiful bay windows with their lovely patina is the Diamond Block, built in 1889. And the tall tan building ahead of the street, originally the federal building, now the city county building.
Tenements. Tenements.
And up on Park Avenue we go. The Rose Granite building coming up to the right was the first Unitarian church. Back in 1901, later became the Helena City Library. It is now the Grand Street Theater place where school-age kids get involved with the performing arts. The great granite building to the right is the Grand Lodge of the Montana Masons. Inside is a display that has the Masonic apron of Captain Meriwether Lewis of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Of course, Lewis and Clark spent quite a bit of time in Montana during their voyage of discovery. Stand close to the big rivers, the Yellowstone and the Missouri, they were the early travel routes across the state.
Look, is in this building. I sent him a text. We'll see if we got it today.
Coming up to the right is St. Peter's Episcopal Church, founded in 1867 by Bishop Daniel Tuttle. Bishop Tuttle and Montana images are depicted in the stained glass windows. To the right is J.J. Hill Park, named after the railroad there, and that created the Great Northern Railroad that connected the Twin Cities with the West Coast. Still does today. There's also a spur line that came south along the Missouri River to serve the Helena area. Called J.J. the Empire Builder, but I think I'd call him the Great Financer. He was able to put together a transcontinental railroad without the aid of government land grants. The large yellow brick building ahead of the train is the Helena Civic Center, but back in 1921, it was the Algeria Shrine Temple. The Shriners had it till a great earthquake back in 1935 damaged the foundation so badly that they ended up having to sell it. After all, during the Great Economic Depression in the 1930s, not many people had extra money. Eventually, the city bought it. Now houses the city fire department. There's a ballroom and auditorium inside as well. town that we're traveling into now is where the beautiful west side homes are, where the elite lived back in the early days.
This is what I wanted to see. We won't be back here.
And if you look closely, curbside scattered throughout the neighborhood, you'll see quite a variety of hitching posts, which might come in handy in case you bring your horse or buggy up here and know where to tie them up. Now, the third floor of each of these mansions is a dedicated ballroom that take turns every Saturday night hosting a social. The red brick home to the right was the home of Charles P. Power, son of T.C. Power, one of our first U.S. senators from Montana. The house and grounds occupy an entire city block. Coming up to our left is the home of Charles W. Sweat, a pioneer cattle baron and an architect designed and built the home. And when it was completed, he and the architect took a trip to St. Paul to pick out furnishings for the home. When he left town, he had a slight cold. By the time he got to St. Paul, that cold had turned to pneumonia. And there he died. He never did come back and enjoy his home. Coming up to our left, and that's my favorite mansion. It's a Tudor-style mansion. Black and white wood on top, gray granite on the bottom. That was the home of B.H. Tatum, the iron industrialist. This ironwork provided iron for the mines, and it was also used as decorative work in the area homes. The street that we're crossing over is named after the famous architect Cass Gilbert. Early in his career, Cass designed many of these mansions. He also designed the Montana Club, and then he was commissioned to design the Minnesota State Capitol building in St. Paul. And back in New York, we designed the Woolworth building as well as the George Washington Bridge. Yet his crowning achievement was to design the U.S. Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. Coming up to the right was the home of T.C. Power, one of the first U.S. senators from Montana. And on November 22nd, 1889, brightly covered carriages streamed to the home carrying dignitaries from Helena, as well as the rest of the state. You see, it was open house. Old T.C. was sure proud of his new home. Inside, you'll find cherry woodwork and carved in place, along with just covered light fixtures, traditionally lit by gas, and since been converted to electricity. As you might imagine, the Powers were quite successful in business, and transportation was one of their most profitable businesses. You see, there were a lot of folks moving west during the 1860s, 70s, and 80s. St. Louis, Missouri was the gateway west. These guys had a riverboat company that would connect Helena with St. Louis. Of course, the riverboats, they weren't quite as big as you might see plying the waters of the Mississippi, as they had to be a little bit more narrow to make it up this far in Missouri, but they could make it to the middle of Montana, which was Fort Benton. From that point on, the river got a little too shallow for the big boats, and then passengers would continue on up the Benton Road, which pretty much runs alongside the Missouri River, right in here to Helena. We'll travel on part of that Benton Road soon. Notice the red brick sidewalks, herringbone design were popular when many of these mansions were built. At that time, there was two primary sidewalk contractors, and they decided to divide the work. Now, the contractor that preferred to use red brick, he built the sidewalks running east and west. The other sidewalk contractor preferred to use poured concrete. he built the sidewalks running north and south. Coming up to our left are a couple of homes that are very similar to each other. The wives were sisters and carried their husbands to build homes next to each other. The blue one was the first home in Helena to have an elevator.
It's a first for sale sign there.
How's the tour going so far this afternoon? Everybody enjoying themselves? Very good. Another rose granite home coming up here on the left looks like a Scottish castle to me. That was the home of A.C. Johnson. When he first came to town, he started out as a bookkeeper for the T.C. Power Transportation Company. Later became a manager over the security building. In the end, one of the founders of the Western Life Insurance Company. All of this took place during the gold rush stage. Now this is a beautiful street we'll be traveling down. The green home coming up to our left is one of the homes that Cass Gilbert designed in a beautiful Romanesque style. Notice the prominent vertical columns. And the red brick Victorian back to the right. That was the home of Samuel T. Hauser, one of the first residential territorial governors. He also built the first hydroelectric dam along the Missouri River, 15 miles to the east of Helena. Actually, the headwaters of the Missouri is only 60 miles to the south of Helena, just outside the town of Three Forks, Montana, and that is where the Madison, the Jefferson, and the Gallatin rivers all come together to form the headwaters of the Missouri. Again, to the right is another home built for Hauser. This one was built with a special purpose. You see, he gave it to his daughter as a wedding present.
Look at this.
The gold house coming up to the right was built for Eddie O'Connell, founder of Eddie's Bread. He first started making bread here in Helena back in 1937. In the end, his bakery stretched clear to the west coast. The architect was a graduate of the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture, where they strove to bring the outside in, a lot of creative use of windows. The red brick home back to the left is the home of Pioneer Cattle Bear and Conrad Coors. Coors and his wife spent the majority of their life in a ranch over in the Deer Lodge Valley. They liked to entertain quite a bit, yet it was hard for folks to make it out to the ranch. So they built this house in town. One of their friends was President Theodore Roosevelt. Early on, Roosevelt, he was also a rancher. You see, as a young man, he suffered a family tragedy. He lost both his wife and his mother the same day due to illness. And he felt he just wanted to take a break from the east. So he came out west to Medora, North Dakota, right on the Montana border, where he ranched for a couple of years at his Elkhorn Ranch. Later he returned to Montana, to presidential candidate. He rode in parades in Butte. Butte during the 1880s was a Pittsburgh of the West, a huge mining industrial area that provided much of the copper that America needed for its industrial revolution. A lot of the copper mines were managed by Amalgamated Copper, which is actually part of Standard Oil. The whole thing was overseen by John D. Rockefeller back in New York City. Roosevelt also came to Helena, where he enjoyed staying at the Montana Club. And he was quite an outdoorsman and sportsman. He had a hunting camp north of here by Augusta. It's still there today. It's called the Theodore Roosevelt National Game Reserve. I've always felt that we as a country are very fortunate to have an outdoorsman like Roosevelt in office during the Progressive Era, as he was certainly able to look a long ways down the road as far as meeting the needs of Americans. He would meet with other men like conservationist John Muir. They would set aside large pieces of land, later turned into parks and national forests for you and I to enjoy today. Always interested in big game conservation. It was Roosevelt who founded the Boone and Crockett Club back in 1902. This road that runs called Benton Avenue, part of the original Benton Road that connected Helena with St. Louis, Missouri. And for those travelers that wanted to go further west, they could use the military road, the Mullen Road, that goes up and over the Continental Divide and it can take you as far as Walla Walla, Washington. Roosevelt was hunting bears north of here at one time, and when he went hunting, he had lots of help. He had cooks and guides, and he was up in the mountains. A little cub bear happened to amble in the camp, and the cook thought the president might like to shoot the bear, so the cook lassoed the bear, tethered it to a tree. It wasn't long before the president returned and looked at the bear and said, "Turn it loose. I don't care to shoot a little bear like that." Well, being a famous person and all, whatever Roosevelt did seemed to make the news, and then not long after that, toy makers got the idea to market little toy bears, and they call them teddy bears after Theodore Roosevelt. Soon we'll be traveling up Last Chance Gulch. There's a story about it that has quite a bit to do with early day Helena history. It started up over Georgia. Prospectors that came here looking for gold, they scoured the hills and valleys, weren't having much luck. And they knew their grub stake was running low, and they figured it was about time to head over to Georgia. Yep, one of the guys was optimistic about finding gold. He said, "Let's give it one more day. Let's make it one last chance to prospect." By the way, to your left, the red brick building at Bankers Bank, branch of the Federal Reserve out of Indiana. Back to the gold miners. They did find gold the next day. They used a little different method. It's called the Georgian method, where the miners marked out an area and they all dug down in the dirt to bedrock. In this case, 7 feet down, and they found gold. And for the next 20 years, 30,000 ounces of gold was taken from the gulch. The amazing thing about Helena is that once the gold was found, it turned into a ghost town. People liked it here. They invested in their community. And as a result, we have quite an interesting gold town. Well, it's not that ghost towns aren't interesting. A lot of people are fascinated with it. It's just it's sometimes kind of hard to find somebody to talk to in a ghost town. Montana's got a lot of those. Around here we got Remini to the west, Maryville to the northwest, and Elkhorn to the south. Here we go up the gulch, whenever there's a parade in town that comes this way. Oftentimes the tour train's in the parade. Our tour train been in operation since 1954. Because as long as they've been around too. Back in '64, I was 10 years old. My family was visiting Helena. We were raised over in Billings. My mother and sister and I tried to ride the train that day. The train's a non-profit organization that stays busy in the summer, goes in hibernation in the fall. This street has a lot of interesting shops and stores. You can get some books, get a bowl of soup. Probably get more than you bargain for around here. If you take a look at this road, you'll notice that it's really crooked. About some people say it's about as crooked as a dog's hind leg, and you wonder why in the world had ever built a road as crooked as this in the middle of town. Well, the reason is there used to be a stream that meandered down the middle of the gulch, and the miners had their claims very carefully staked out on either side. Eventually, they were able to garner all the gold off their claim. They found at that time that their land was valuable as real estate. They'd put up a building on it. Many of these buildings on either side of us. The foundation is the same size as that original gold claim. Up here by the stoplight on the right is a rose granite building. That's the power block. Remember TC and his son Charles was gone by their mansions. Well, that was their headquarters. They had a riverboat company, a string of hardware stores, and a rose granite stone quarry. To the left is Constitution Park. Hi. And next we'll travel up into the walking mall, part of a 1960s urban renewal program called Model Cities. Actually part of our president of the 1960s, Lyndon Johnson's Great Society plan. Coming out for the ride is a Big Dipper ice cream store. Is it too early for ice cream? No. And the Parrots coming up on the right, they've been fishing up ice cream for about 85 years. They've got a classic soda fountain and they make their own chocolates too. The bull whacker used to crack that whip over the top of teams' heads as they pull their load up the Benton Road.
Yeah.
Couple interesting buildings coming up here on the left. The one with the staircase is the securities building, first prominent bank built in the Gulch back in 1866. The brownstone trim was brought over from Bayfield, Wisconsin. Large brown brick building to the left, that's the Placer Hotel. At the time of its construction, it was the largest hotel between the Twin Cities and Seattle. It served as the campaign headquarters for JFK during the 1960 presidential election while he's in Montana.
Tattoo place. Farendo. Yeah.
Hey, looking back to it, we're going to travel up into the upper walking mall. If you look back to the right, there is a large mural that celebrates the pioneer spirit of women in Montana. The saddle bronc rider, the big Fanning Sperry Steele, two-time world champ up in the Calgary Stampede. Did you know that Montana was the first state in the nation to send a woman to Congress? Jeanette Rankin back in 1916 served in the U.S. House of Reps. She was re-elected and served again in 1940. How's it going, guys? Coming up to the left is the Windbag Saloon, better known as Big Dorothy's. We're talking about that place a little later on.
We were sitting in that. I want to get home. We were sitting in this.
Coming up to the right, the yellow trolley car, great way to get around. Most cities have it. This one originally drawn by horses and pulled by electric motors. Did you know that Helena was one of the first cities in America to get alternating current electricity? Second only to Telluride, Colorado. First some of that advocated by Tesla. The reason was the new hard rock mining equipment required AC power. Samuel Hauser built some of the first hydroelectric dams along the Missouri River about 15 miles to the east that provided power for not only the mines but the city as well. Of course, bigger cities on the east and west coast of America already had electricity. but it was all DC or direct current as advocated by Thomas Edison. Today, Helena's electrical energy needs are met 70% by hydroelectric. To the right, the Lewis Clark County Library. To the left, up in that hill, top of the hill, you can see a ship tanker taking off a decommissioned U.S. Navy ship, USS Helena. For over 100 years, there's been a ship named after the town. There was a gunboat that served the Spanish-American War. The cruiser was torpedoed by the Japanese while in Pearl Harbor, but it was repaired and fit with radar that led many battle groups up through Guadalcanal. Its replacement was a 1960 Pacific flagship. Currently, there's a nuclear submarine of the Los Angeles class in the USS Helena, and its home port is Norfolk, Virginia. Though originally Point Loma in San Diego, 3 years ago it moved out to the East Coast. Speaking of Norfolk, as we speak, the keel is being laid for a Virginia class submarine, and when it is christened, it'll be called the USS Montana. Ahead of the train, up on the side of the hill, a stone retaining wall with a full fence on top. That was the main road to this part of town. Why did they put it up there? Well, down where we're at, this is where a lot of the gold claims were. And there was a miner in the Gulch who's worth his salt, would allow his claim to be covered up with a road. So they said, you can build it on the side of the hill. Coming up to the right is Pioneer Cabin, first modern cabin built off the Gulch, considered modern because it has a full front window and a wooden floor. I don't know what else you'd need. Next up, Reader's Alley, brick alleyway with the cottages alongside. He was a brick mason from Philadelphia, and he built the cottages and would rent them out to miners as winter quarters. We're on West Park Avenue, leading to West Main, right at the southern edge of Helena. But we're also right at the edge of Helena National Forest, great place for hiking and mountain biking. And to the right, up the mountain, that's the city park, that's Mount Helena. But we will take, we're going to skirt around the southern end of town, use Cruz Avenue, coming up here on the left. This brown two-story stone building to the right, originally the Tatum Iron Works. When Tatum's first moved to town, they lived up on the second floor. President Abraham Lincoln had a dream to at least symbolically bind America together again by building a transcontinental railroad from the east to west coast. Of course, the Civil War postponed all that, and it was up to President Grant in 1869 to help build the first transcontinental railroad across America, largely with the help of immigrant labor, working out of the Midwest. Omaha, Nebraska on the Union Pacific were Irish immigrants, and they'd lay as many as 10 miles of track a day, working west towards Utah. While out the west coast, California, the Big Four, Leland, Stanford, Crocker and Company, helped build put together the Central Pacific Railroad, working out of Sacramento, actually Roseville, California. And they hired the Chinese immigrants, and they worked east going up and over the Sierra Nevadas into Utah, where the Golden Spike was driven. Then the Chinese worked their way north into Montana, where they helped build the Great Northern and Northern Pacific Railroads. Back during the 1880s, 20% of the people who lived in Montana were Chinese. Looking ahead of the train, up on top of the hill, you can see the silhouette of the fire tower, guardian of the Gulch. Fire was a big problem back in the early days. Miners were careless with it. Oftentimes the fire would start at the bottom of the Gulch and work up the side of the hill, just like smoke blowing up a chimney. Helena burned the ground 3 times. People did get tired of that. They built the fire tower, manned it 24 hours a day. Whenever there was a fire, they'd ring the bell. Everybody would come and put it out. Directly below the fire tower, perched on the side of the hill, is the Bluestone House. built by an architect back in 1889 for his bride. But before they could move in, the architect was killed. The bride fell heir to the house, but eventually couldn't afford to keep it up, so they sold it. Lincoln followed the history of the home up until the year 1900, but then it completely disappears between the years 1900 and 1935. We also know the very famous house of ill repute called the Castle. Some folks in Helena will tell you that's where it was. Now take a look to your left. Above the trees, you can see that stone retaining wall on the other side of the gulch. Follow it up that ravine there to the left, and you'll spot the second oldest bridge in the state of Montana. Now, the oldest bridge was built by the Utah Northern Railroad out of Corinne, Utah. And they came up through Oneida, Red Rock, Dillon, Montana, to the gold fields of the Southwest. Dillon set in the Big Hole Valley. Huge agricultural area, a lot of beef cattle. It does have the notoriety of having a well-stocked Carnegie Library. Speaking of libraries, if you go to the smelter city of Anaconda, they have the notoriety of having a Randolph Hearst library. Hearst and Marcus Daly, the founder of Anaconda, were buddies. That's how that all worked out. Back to the Bluestone House, its sister institution, Big Dorothy's, sits down in the walking mall by the electronic art. Reportedly, Big Dorothy was in operation into the 1960s. Across the street to the left, a three-story red brick building. If you look up on top, you can see that's Helena's original Masonic temple, built in 1885. Next, we're going to pull up now the gulch and go by the Lewis and Clark County Courthouse. Well, we got a good motor in the tour train. It's a Rolls. Not exactly a Rolls Royce. We like to call it a Rolls Canarly because it likes to roll down the hills all right, but then it can hardly make it up the other side. Had a whole trainload of folks from England on board in May, and they said it sure sounded like a Rolls to them. And then I told them it was a Rolls Canarly. Well, they got a kick out of that. They were a fun group and some pretty good tippers too. Hey, take a look at that red brick building to the left. That's the Federal Assay Office. Only 5 of those ever built in the USA. That is where the miner would bring their gold to be weighed and assessed in exchange for U.S. currency. To our left, on the top of the hill, is the Lewis and Clark County Courthouse, built in the 1880s. Originally the territorial captain building. And again, to our left across the street is the Myrna Loy Theater for Performing Arts. Kind of hard to see from here. Let's swing in there. I don't think anybody will notice. Myrna has quite a variety of entertainment throughout the year. So, to the left, the courthouse. To the right, the Myrna Loy Theater. And like a lot of buildings, somewhere along the line it got repurposed. You see, it wasn't always a theater. In fact, the original purpose of the building was a little more confining than a theater. Yes, those bars in the windows, they were for keeping guys in, not for keeping people out. That was the Lewis and Clark County Jailhouse, built in 1894. And at the time of its construction, it was considered to be the most ornate jail in the Northwest. As you might imagine, the sheriff, he was mighty proud of the jail. In fact, he's so proud of it, he ended up holding his daughter's wedding reception there. Look at the beautiful stonework on your left in the old livery stable. And when Kessler started to fire bricks in the west end of town, they topped the 3rd floor off with Kessler bricks. Look at the plaque, fallout shelter. Cold War remnant of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Fortunately, we never found ourselves diving in there. And to our left across the street is a large brown building, Art Deco style, which was very popular during the 1930s. In this area of town recently, a house was discovered that had a secret room for decades. People living in it didn't realize it, but it was being remodeled. The carpenter discovered it, and we looked into the history of the home. We feel like this home very likely any shenanigans took place that were instrumental in bringing the capital to Helena. People, the businessmen, the miner knew that once the home was gone and developed, very likely Helena would become just another ghost town. So they petitioned the state legislature to bring a capital here. But once word got out that the capital was going to be moved from Virginia City, it seemed like most other Montana towns wanted the capital too. There's a need for a statewide development to make things even more complicated. They must be wealthy and eccentric. Government kings from you got involved. Mark and Davey promoted this company down in Anaconda. Well, William Clark promoted the freestanding independent town of Helena. And what William Clark wanted, William Clark could always buy, because during the 1880s, he was the wealthiest man in America. He was making $1 million a week off his copper mine. You see, it was during the Industrial Revolution in the 1880s American industry bought a lot of copper. Clark's copper mines were spread out. They were in South America, in the country of Chile, or just north of Phoenix at Rome, Arizona. Several around Utah, and several around his hometown of Butte, Montana. Clark did get his way, the group out there, I think we started talking. Leaving Helena had won. Many people demanded a recount of the vote, so a committee was formed. They went from county to county, everything was fine until they got here, where they found there were twice as many votes cast in this county as there were registered voters. We looked into the house, we couldn't decipher exactly what happened or who was totally responsible for it. But in any event, for those of us that live here in Helena, we're thankful that the capital is here, for without it, it may be just another ghost town. Clark was also in Nevada quite a bit regarding the Comstock Road up north. He built the first railroad running from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. It had a lot of real estate in southern Nevada. In fact, when you stand in Las Vegas, you're also in Clark County, Nevada. To the right, the house of the secret room. That is where all the ballots were found, and that's where the sheriff lived at the time. As you might imagine, the people in Helena were thrilled with the news that the capital was coming this way, but they had a big problem. They needed a building and they were broke. There was no income tax back then. No way to generate a lot of money, but a couple of prominent citizens stepped forward to help out. One was a rancher named Winnie. Before this end of the valley was a town, it was Winnie's Cattle Ranch. Then he told a committee, he said, well, why don't you fellows come on up to the ranch, see if you guys bought a place in the Capitol building. I'll give you a good deal on the land. So the land committee ended up selecting a 17-acre site where the Capitol complex now sits. They were sheepish when they approached Winnie because they really didn't have much money. He said, that's all right, fellas. I told you I'd give you a good deal. In fact, I'll sell it to you for $1. Why they jumped at that, then they needed a building at $350,000. And state bonds were issued. Another man stepped forward and he said, I'll take them all. So Thomas E. Cruz, owner of the Woman Mine. Same guy that gave the majority of the money for the cathedral. So between the Montana Ranch and the Montana Miner, got a good capital building. Well, I spend the majority of my time here in Helena being a U.S. history teacher and 8th graders. Over at the Helena Middle School each spring I work real hard to keep the kids on track. I tell you guys come to school every day, and then on the last day of school, we can go on a field trip. I'll give you a ride in a tour train. Well, I sure seem to like that. It takes me about 5 trips to haul them all around. Eventually I get it done. A lot of times we end up here by the Capitol building, which is a great place to visit. For the last 5 years, workmen have been refurbishing the building inside now, bringing it back to the original luster. I'd like to personally invite you to visit the Capitol building. Now there's a self-guided tour that's available all day long. It meets underneath the dome in the rotunda area, and there's no charge for it. Tuesday afternoon, farmers market, 2:30 to 6:30, coming up here on the left. Get your fresh vegetables. Take a look at this, the original Capitol building in the middle, the sandstone building. Of course, it was built for $350,000. Does have the notoriety of being the first state Capitol building to be pre-wired for electricity, and the only state Capitol building to fly the Irish flag on St. Paddy's Day. The wings on either side, part of a 1913 edition. This time they used gray granite. That was quarried just south of Helena over in Jefferson County. The wing on the left, that's where our state legislature meets for a few months every other year. Great big beautiful room, well appointed. Had the Charlie Russell painting on the end of it depicting Lewis and Clark leading the Flathead Indians over at Ross's Hole. In fact, the painting is so big, old Charlie literally had to raise the roof of his log cabin studio up in Great Falls to fit the thing in. And the wing on this side is where state our governor has his office. Also, there's the original Supreme Court room, complete with chandelier and vaulted ceilings. Don't forget about the Grizzly Bear over at the Fish Wildlife Department's building, just below our depot on 6th Avenue. And then one block to the right.
What's the home and eat?
Don't forget about the museum as well. Great place to visit. If you'd rather just like to step in there, get a nice cool drink of water, use the restroom. Just walk into those double doors there, and straight back to your left. Well, I see our depot coming up here, so please stay seated till the train comes to a complete stop, and then you can exit on the sidewalk side. Well, there's certainly a lot of different things to do in Helena, but you know what? You guys just got done doing the best thing to do in town. That's to take a ride in the tour train. Great to have you. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for coming.